It is the 1st of May, 1960, and it is a holiday across the Soviet Union. In the villages outside Sverdlovsk, deep in the Ural mountains, people are not working. They are outside in the fields, in the thin spring sunshine. It is May Day. Then someone looks up. There is a parachute in the sky. It is drifting down slowly over the farmland. A man is hanging beneath it. The villagers begin to run toward him. He lands hard in a field. He is tangled in his lines and he cannot get free quickly. The farm workers reach him before he can stand. They see a man in a strange flight suit. They find an American pistol on him. They find items marked with the flag of the United States. And in his pocket they find something very strange. A silver dollar coin. Except it is not really a coin. It comes apart. Inside it there is a needle. The needle is coated with poison. It is there so that a captured pilot can end his own life. And this pilot has not used it. His name is Francis Gary Powers. He is 30 years old. He works for the Central Intelligence Agency. Officially, he does not. Officially, he is a civilian pilot flying weather research missions. He carries no military identification. If he is caught, his country can say it has never heard of him. That is the arrangement. And 4,000 miles away, in Washington, nobody knows that he is alive. They are about to tell the world a lie. And a man in Moscow is going to let them. To understand why an American was falling out of the Soviet sky, you have to understand what Washington did not know. In the 1950s, America was afraid, not of an invasion, but of a number. Nobody in Washington knew how many nuclear missiles the Soviet Union really had. The Soviets were a closed country. No journalists, no inspectors, no photographs. So the Americans were guessing, and the guess that frightened them was called the missile gap. The fear was that Moscow was building rockets faster than America could count them. Eisenhower needed to know the truth. So the Americans built an aircraft that could look down on the Soviet Union from the edge of space. It was designed in secret by a Lockheed engineer named Kelly Johnson. It had impossibly long, thin wings, like a glider. It could fly at 70,000 feet. That is more than 13 miles above the ground. At that height, no Soviet fighter could reach it. At first, no Soviet missile could reach it either. The Americans called the aircraft the U-2. Its camera could pick out an object on the ground the size of a dinner plate. For 4 years, U-2 aircraft flew over the Soviet Union and photographed everything. And the photographs told Eisenhower something remarkable. The missile gap was not real. The Soviets had far fewer rockets than America had feared. Eisenhower knew this, but he could not tell the American public how he knew it. To prove there was no missile gap, he would have to admit he was spying. So he said nothing, and let the fear continue. The Soviets could see them on radar. They could track them. They simply could not touch them. It was humiliating, and Nikita Khrushchev was furious. So the Soviets built a missile that could go higher. And by 1960, they had it. The Americans knew the risk was growing. Eisenhower was nervous. He had a summit meeting with Khrushchev coming in Paris in a matter of weeks. Arms control was on the table. Peace, or something close to it, felt possible for the first time. So he set a deadline. There would be no more overflights after the 1st of May. One last flight. The mission was codenamed Grand Slam. It was the most ambitious flight ever attempted. Powers would take off from Peshawar, in Pakistan. He would fly across the entire Soviet Union from south to north, almost 3,000 miles of hostile airspace. He would photograph missile test sites, factories, and airfields on the way. And he would land in Norway. He took off early in the morning. For hours, everything went exactly as planned. Then, high above Sverdlovsk, the sky opened up beneath him. A Soviet missile battery fired a salvo. 14 missiles went up at once. One of them detonated close enough. The aircraft did not explode, but its tail was torn away, and it began to fall. Inside the cockpit, Powers was thrown forward. The plane was tumbling, and the force pinned him in place. There was a self-destruct switch in the cockpit. It was designed to blow the aircraft and its cameras to pieces. Powers could not reach it. He got the canopy off and threw himself out into the freezing air. His oxygen hose caught and held him to the dying aircraft. He fought with it until it snapped. And then he was falling over the Soviet Union. There was one more thing that went wrong that day. The Soviet missiles did not only hit the American. A Soviet fighter had been scrambled to chase the U-2. Because it was a holiday, its identification codes had not been changed. The missile battery could not tell it was one of their own. They shot it down too. A Soviet pilot named Sergei Safronov was killed. He died defending his country from an aircraft his own side destroyed. In Washington, the U-2 was simply overdue. When it did not land in Norway, the CIA assumed the worst. They assumed the plane had come apart at altitude. They assumed the pilot was dead, and they had a plan for exactly this. The plan was a lie, prepared in advance. On the 3rd of May, the Americans announced that a NASA weather research aircraft had gone missing. They said the pilot had reported trouble with his oxygen supply. They said he may have blacked out. They said the aircraft may have drifted across the Soviet border by accident. To make the story convincing, they even painted a U-2 in civilian colors and showed it to reporters. Photographers took pictures of it. The story went around the world. It was a complete fabrication, and in Moscow, Nikita Khrushchev read it and said nothing. Because he had the pilot, Powers was alive and in a cell. He was talking. The Soviets also had the aircraft. Not scattered fragments, but large parts of it. They had the cameras. They had the film. And on that film were photographs of Soviet military bases. Khrushchev had all of it. And he waited. On the 5th of May, he stood before the Supreme Soviet and made an announcement. He said an American spy plane had been shot down over Soviet territory. And then he stopped. He said nothing about the pilot. Nothing about the wreckage. Nothing about the film. He let the Americans keep talking, and the Americans walked straight into it. They repeated the story. They insisted the aircraft was a weather plane. They insisted the president had known nothing about any spy flight. They dug the hole deeper. And on the 7th of May, Khrushchev sprang the trap. He announced that the pilot was alive. He announced that he was in Moscow, and talking. He announced that the Soviets had the aircraft, the cameras, and the film. He said, and I am paraphrasing, that the Americans had been caught in their own lie. The cover story collapsed in a single afternoon, and it left Eisenhower with an impossible choice. He could keep denying it, but then he would be admitting that he did not control his own government. That American spy planes were flying over the Soviet Union without his knowledge, or he could admit that he had ordered it himself. One senator said America had been caught with its hand in the cookie jar. There was no good answer. Eisenhower was at his farm in Gettysburg when he learned the truth. A telephone call told him the Soviets had his pilot. The President of the United States had been caught lying to the world. According to an aide, he said he would like to resign. He did not resign. He did something no leader had done before. He publicly took responsibility for the spy flights. No head of state had ever admitted to espionage like that. It was an extraordinary thing to do, and it did not save the summit. On the 16th of May, the leaders gathered in Paris. Khrushchev demanded an apology. He demanded that the flights be stopped forever. He demanded that the men responsible be punished. Eisenhower offered to suspend the flights. He would not apologize. Khrushchev stood up and walked out. He withdrew his invitation for Eisenhower to visit Moscow. The Paris summit collapsed before it had properly begun. Arms control talks were finished. The chance of an early thaw in the Cold War was gone. Within 2 years, the world would come to the edge of nuclear war over Cuba. Francis Gary Powers was put on trial in Moscow in August of 1960. The trial was public, and it was a performance. The wreckage of his aircraft was put on display in Moscow for the public to walk past. Ordinary Soviet citizens queued to look at the camera that had photographed their country. It was proof, laid out on the floor, that the Americans had lied. He was convicted of espionage. He was sentenced to 3 years in prison and 7 more years of hard labor. He served less than 2. In February of 1962, on a bridge between East and West Germany, the Americans traded him. They gave the Soviets a captured Soviet spy. The Soviets gave back the pilot. Powers came home, and America was not kind to him. People asked why he had not destroyed the aircraft. People asked why he had not used the poison needle. They asked why he had come home alive at all. It took years for the truth to be accepted. Powers had been thrown around a tumbling aircraft and could not reach the switch. He had never been ordered to kill himself. The needle was an option, not an instruction. He had given the Soviets almost nothing they did not already have. Decades later, his own country finally awarded him medals for what he had endured. He did not live to see most of it. He was killed in a helicopter crash in 1977. The U-2 flights over the Soviet Union ended that day and never resumed, but the spying did not stop. 3 months after Powers fell out of the sky, America recovered its first film from a satellite in orbit. Cameras in space could photograph the Soviet Union without crossing its borders. They could not be shot down. They could not be captured. They could not be paraded in front of the world's cameras. The age of the spy pilot ended above a field in the Urals, and Khrushchev did not win either. He had humiliated an American president in front of the world, but he had destroyed the summit that might have eased the Cold War. The hardliners in Moscow took note of how badly it had gone. Khrushchev later said this was the beginning of his own decline. He was removed from power 4 years later. Everything turned on a single afternoon. A missile fired on a holiday. A pilot who did not die. A lie told too confidently. And a man in Moscow who simply waited and let his enemy talk. The Americans had built an aircraft that could see everything. They had flown it for 4 years without being touched. And in the end, it was not the aircraft that failed them. It was the lie they told about it, and the man who saw the lie coming and said nothing until it was too late to take it back.